This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical or health advice. This podcast is not intended to replace professional medical advice, nor have the statements been evaluated by the US FDA or similar international bodies. We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of information shared during this podcast. The views expressed in this podcast may not be those of the host. Greetings, health and human enthusiasts, and welcome to the Regaining Health and Humanity podcast. I'm your trusted guide, Dr. Scott Johnson, and I'm both humbled and thrilled that you've chosen to join me on this fearless pursuit of knowledge and inspiration. My mission is to elevate your well-being naturally, arming you with evidence-based insights, revolutionary breakthroughs, and impactful health tactics. But that's not all. Together, we'll dive deep into the mysterious realms of human existence, unraveling the secrets of what makes us truly thrive. This podcast isn't just about information. It's a catalyst for change. Join me in confidently exploring potent natural solutions, cutting-edge health strategies, and igniting courageous conversations that cultivate meaningful connections and foster empathy for humankind. I'm here to empower you to unleash your extraordinary potential and lead a life jam-packed with boundless health and happiness. So get ready. Your extraordinary journey to boundless health and happiness starts now. Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Regaining Health and Humanity podcast. Positive relationships and healthy connections are vital to overall human health. As humans, we are meant to have healthy connections and feel a sense of belonging. In fact, research suggests that having a social support system can reduce the risk of both disease and mortality. You heard that right. Your relationships can help you live a longer and healthier life. So for today's episode, we are going to focus on building strong relationships. My guest is Kayal Monson. Kayla is a marriage and family therapist located in California, where she lives with her two girls and husband. She has been in the mental health field for over 15 years, working with families, youth, and adults. She also works as a wellness coach, helping people discover natural solutions for their mental and physical health. So welcome, Kayla.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'm glad that we're having this conversation because I think that when people think about their overall health, they tend to forget about relationships and how important those relationships are to their overall well-being. So I want to start off kind of talking about marriages in general, because statistics show that about half of first marriages end in divorce, and divorce rates are actually higher among those entering a second or a third marriage. There are many reasons for this, including finances, infidelity, and a lack of family support. Can you share what the fundamental elements are that make a marriage strong and resilient?
Yeah, so I think that it will vary a little bit from couple to couple, but I think that some of the biggest ones that I've seen both in my own marriage and in, working with different families and couples throughout the year is a big one is communication and actually talking about things versus holding them in. But I think even bigger than that is expectations. I think that as humans, we have a lot of expectations of partners that go unsaid. Maybe it's taking the trash out. Maybe it's making the bed. Maybe it's, helping the child with the homework, making dinner. We have all of these responsibilities in the home, and how do we divide them? And I think sometimes in our head, we think, oh, that's my responsibility or that's their responsibility, but we don't ever talk about it. And so what happens is subconsciously, when our partner doesn't take out the trash, but we believe that that is their role and we expect them to do that, we're angry. But at the same time, we never communicated that expectation to our partner. And this becomes even bigger when you have kids, when you have other responsibilities. Maybe you own a business together, you own a house. as you tack on more responsibilities, this conversation becomes more and more important. Whose role is it to do these different things? And I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen come up in conflicts between partners and marriages is basically that someone has an expectation or a need that's unmet that they never
Hmm.
communicated to their spouse. Marriage is hard in this way. I've always said that, that marriage is something that you constantly work at because there's constantly more responsibilities. There's different decisions you have to make as a couple, and those require communication and being on the same page. And that can be difficult sometimes. That can require a little bit of give and take, maybe letting some of your expectations go, maybe, rewriting what some of those things are, etc.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned communication because that really leads right into my next question, which is how important is communication in maintaining a healthy marriage or relationship? And what are some effective strategies couples can use to improve their communication skills?
So I think that in any relationship, communication is really big, but especially in a marriage. Often because you're making big decisions, whether it's for your children, for your finances, for where your life is headed. Those are decisions that you're going to make together. And in order to do that effectively, without getting upset at the other person, you have to talk about it. And I think the more that you talk about things, the more that you flesh out maybe some things that are hidden, maybe some unresolved trauma that you have, or patterns from your past that you didn't realize were affecting your relationship. There are so many things that come out once you are in a relationship that have nothing to do with the relationship, right? They have to do with prior relationships or different things that you've been through. But then when it comes to communicating with that partner, you see them through that filter. So that filter is going to be all of your past relationships, how you were treated by other people, your view of yourself, your view of them, your expectations, all of these different things that come into play when you are communicating with this person. And so I always try, this is something I've implemented as I've grown over the years in my own self growth, but to be a little bit curious about what's happening in that communication or what's mine and what's theirs. So I feel like a few things that I know from experience, just as speaking from my experience of things that I found helpful in relationships is being honest about how you're feeling, but also not making it about them and something that they did, but make it more about how you feel. So we talk about this a lot with kids and using I statements. I felt hurt when you said that. I felt angry when you took that from me.
Hmm.
Because if you go at the person saying, you did this and I'm upset, they're going to get defensive. And when someone's in that defensive space, can't really communicate or have a conversation. It feels threatening. They might shut down, all of those things. But if it can be about you, I'm feeling this way, and you're taking ownership of that feeling and making those I statements, it can be a lot better of a conversation with a little bit less emotion around it. And then the second part to this, like I said, is being curious. Is this about me? Is this about something that I'm struggling with internally? Or is this about our relationship or this issue? What is coming up for me? And really exploring your feelings individually before bringing them to like the relationship, if that makes sense. Because I think that you come at it without thinking about any of these things. Someone's going to get defensive. Someone's going to get angry. There might be yelling. You're going to come at it both angry, and that's not going to be productive. And so I think that's the other part of it is calling a timeout. If you are feeling so angry, you feel like I cannot have a productive conversation about this right now. I'm not going to change my mind right now. Sometimes you have to call a timeout and say, you know what? I think we should table this until an hour from now because I'm feeling too angry to talk about this. Or I need some time to think about this. I'm feeling overstimulated or overwhelmed. And you and your partner have to agree to respect that with one another and to talk about when maybe it's being used inappropriately, right? You're always asking for a break. You will never come back to the conversation. Those are things where you're going to have to explore that too. It needs to be used appropriately. But I think talking about your feelings, becoming curious about what is happening here. Is this about something going on with me? Am I upset about something completely different that has nothing to do with my partner? Kind of like a child that comes home and is yelling at their mom, but their mom is clueless. What did I do? And then comes out later that a friend was mean to them at school. Had nothing to do with you. They just felt comfortable around you. We do that with our partners too, because we feel comfortable with them. And then the third part, like I said, is really, again, those I statements, exploring and taking a timeout if you need to, so that you're not going at the conversation when your emotions are too heightened. You guys need to take some time out, cool off a little bit, because that's not going to make for a productive conversation when emotions are that high.
Those are all great tips. Those you statements tend to be more accusatory and they inflame the situation. So I like that you're saying you need to use these I statements, or expressing how you feel, or what's happened from your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier too, expectations or needs, and I'm a fan of the book called His Needs, Her Needs, because it helps men and women better understand their partner's needs, which are very different.
Mm-hmm.
I think naturally we assume that our partner's needs will be very similar to our own, but men and women approach relationship needs very differently. While every couple faces conflict, ignoring the different needs leads to what the author calls love bank withdrawals. And so, what are the most effective techniques for resolving disputes without damaging the relationship?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that can be really important. Knowing your partner. So, what do you notice that they do when they're upset? How can you tell that they're angry or sad? And noticing those cues in your partner. How can you tell when they're triggered? Because I think that will help you approach things in a different way when you're recognizing maybe what's going on for them internally, not just what's going on for you. I also think that, when you are trying to have these difficult conversations, it's important to also know how your partner likes to be comforted, or maybe, what is their love language? There is a lot of studies on love language. Some people love
Mm-hmm.
acts of service, right? Somebody doing something for them. Some people love words of affirmation and just being praised for what they've done. Some people, it's touch and intimacy. And so, what is your partner's preferred love language as well? So that when you are having tough conversations, you can also provide support and be, more of a support to each other versus a hindrance where you're just making each other more angry or more upset. When you can come at a situation and make it more about you as a couple solving this versus this person and this person solving this, it's you're going to look at it a lot differently. So maybe like externalizing the issue. So if the issue is finances, not making it about who spent more this month or who did this or how this got created, but okay, we're a couple and we have these finances we're in charge of, and for whatever reason this is what's going on. Like, what can we do about it? So making it solution focused as well, where you're both working towards the same goal. What is our goal here? What do we want to see happen? Okay, well, we want to cut our expenses by 10%. All right, how are we going to do that? What can each of us cut out? So kind of making it more of teamwork and group work versus two solo people with different viewpoints
Mm-hmm.
coming at the situation and blaming each other. And I think that a lot of couples eventually get there, but they start with the blaming and the anger and all of that. And then once they're calmed down, it becomes like, how can we solve this? Like, I want to move past this. how can we get there? And so I think making the issue not about either one of you, but just we have this issue, let's solve it, and working on it together, and both of you agreeing to help in different ways. So it's not just falling on one person. And I know that this can be difficult depending on where people are at with their communication skills. And often in relationships, each partner is at a different place. Everybody has their different, traumas that they bring with them, like we talked about, and just different backgrounds, like how did their parents communicate, right? Because
Hmm.
that's what they learned. And so this is something that you're constantly working for. It's not something that just happens overnight, and every single time an issue comes up, don't expect that you're always going to go at it in what you expect to be like, a good or perfect way. That's just not how it works. Sometimes when stress is really high, it just doesn't go the way that you want it to go. And so, no, I think having some grace and understanding that your communication is constantly evolving, and that's okay. And, if you're in this relationship for the long haul, you have a lot of time to work on that. And
Hmm.
every time something comes up, you can learn from the last time, maybe what didn't work, what can work better now. But it does take work, it does take thought, and it does take, some planning as far as like what could I do differently next time. I think that we can look at our goals in life and think, okay, what worked well, what didn't, but when it comes to relationships, we just don't ever think about that. And so I think just consciously having that thought in our head of what went well, what didn't, how does my partner prefer me to show love, what are the cues that I can tell that they're upset, what do I need from them? And have I communicated that need? And really trying to communicate those things, because I think that's one of the biggest things I see is that someone thinks they've communicated something that they haven't.
Yeah. One of the other things I want to get into is I think in modern society, we have so many different distractions and things that are pulling us different directions. We have our work commitments, and we have family commitments and community commitments, and then we have things that we want to do for leisure and pleasure. I think it was described really well by a comedian recently. I saw a reel, and she basically said that her and her husband have great date nights because they watch a giant screen mounted on the wall while they're staring at a smaller screen in their hands. And that's kind of how society is now, where our focus is on these digital devices. So my question is, how can couples foster and maintain emotional intimacy over the years, especially when life gets busy and stressful?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the harder things because I think it often comes last. I know, the kids in our relationship, it's always the kids. And so it often comes last, right? Because if we try to have an adult conversation, we're interrupted 1,000 times.
Hmm.
And I think that sometimes what happens too is, you think, oh, we'll talk about it at the end of the day. And the end of the day comes and you're just so tapped out. You're touched out, you're tapped out, you don't want to think, you don't want to have any conversations. And so it can be really hard to fit that in. And I think one, recognizing that, because I think sometimes, again, we have maybe it's even an unrealized expectation that, well, I'm with them all day, it should be easy. Or, you know, we've already done that, but maybe that was a week ago. I mean, I think that time just goes by so quickly that it's very easy to miss those moments. And you have to be very intentional. And I know sometimes for me, I have to, be intentional about thinking about putting down my phone to have those conversations. I think one of the things that can really help couples is when they find things that they both like exploring or talking about with each other. Because there's definitely things that my husband likes that I could care less about. I don't want to talk about a dirt bike. I know
Right.
nothing about mechanics. I could care less. And so I think a lot of times couples try to talk about things that interest them, not realizing that oh, this my partner doesn't really care about this. And so finding that common ground, and this is important even, when you start dating, knowing the other person's values and what's important to them, what they want out of life. I mean, those are big questions I think that should be asked, because if you're not on the same page with your values, it's going to make one, having conversations really difficult, because if you disagree about all the things, then even trying to foster that intimacy is going to be frustrating if you don't have any common ground whatsoever. So finding that common ground with one another, maybe sometimes it is talking about the kids, and
Hmm.
sometimes it's laughing about things that they said or did, and sometimes it's about your relationship. Sometimes it's about something you enjoy together. Sometimes, some couples, it's politics or things in the news that are interesting, or did you hear about this new health thing, and kind of, talking about those things. So I think finding things that you're both interested in and making it a point to talk about those. And at the same time, showing interest in maybe some of your partner's things that you're not very interested about, but you're glad that they have that hobby. And so
Hmm.
it may not be an extensive conversation, but paying attention when they're talking about something that they enjoy. And then I think, like I said, being intentional, but sometimes you have to plan it. Sometimes you have to say, like, we haven't gotten a chance to talk at all today. Can we take 5 minutes before bed and just talk about our day
Hmm.
and what happened? Um, Sometimes I think too, and this is something that I appreciate, is when I'm really focused on something and someone tries to have a conversation with me, it's very hard for me to switch focus. And so explaining that to my partner, and then asking for permission almost. Hey, I'd really love to talk to you about this thing. Is now a good time? Or would it be better to kind of, maybe talk in an hour? Because I think we always expect that, our loved ones, our partners, especially, are just there for us all the time. But sometimes it's not the best time for them. And so inviting into these conversations, hey, I'd really love to talk about this. Is this a good time? Especially if it's something serious. But when it comes to just, those everyday conversations, just capitalizing on the moments that you do get, those few quiet minutes where maybe the kids are playing and you can have that conversation, knowing that it might get cut short, planning those date nights where you intentionally go somewhere. And this can be hard if you have young children and you don't have anybody to watch them. And sometimes it is putting them to bed a little bit early and maybe watching a movie together, or a 30-minute show without phones, and laughing together. And it can just be
Hmm.
that simple. Other times it's, maybe paying, your neighborhood teenager to watch them in the other room while you guys have a quiet dinner in the other room. I mean, there's creative ways to do it, but I think it's really important to be intentional and plan that time together, or else you'll never get it. Especially if you work demanding jobs or you have kids. You'll just never get it.
Yeah, modern society is so busy, and I like what you said that take some interest in your partner's interests, even if you may not be completely interested in them. I don't think someone should be expected to give up their passions and their interests because their partner is not interested in them. So that's, I think, really important. But I also like that you said to be intentional about putting down the phone. I like to tell people, be present and put away your digital distractions.
Yeah.
And I learned this lesson years ago when my wife was out of town with our two oldest daughters, leaving me with our son and daughter at home, and that were young at the time. And I was working. And I decided, they asked if they could go out for ice cream with me. And I said, sure, I'll take you out for an ice cream. And so we went to the ice cream shop. And of course, as soon as I get there, my phone started blowing up with a work issue that needed to be addressed. And so I order their ice cream and I'm on my phone and I'm trying to, respond to this work issue that's happening. And I just happened to look up, and in this ice cream shop just happened to be two other dads with their kids, and both of them had their entire focus on their phone, just like I did. And I looked at that and I said, this work issue can wait. I need to be present with these kids that are here and probably missing their mom because mom's the favorite. Let's just get down to it. I tease them that the most common thing I ever hear from my kids is, "Where's mom?" And so um, I put my phone away, turned it off, and said, "I'm sorry, that's going to wait till tomorrow. I'm going to focus on these kids." And we had a lot better evening. And I think you can apply that same thing to relationships with your partner. It's so easy to get caught up in work or something that's on the phone that just takes you completely out of being present with the individual in front of you there, and you lose that connection.
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, it's very distracting and again, intentional. You know, I have to think
Mm-hmm.
about it and
Right.
decide, you know what? Nope, this can wait. I'm going to put this away for now.
Mm-hmm.
From this time to this time, you know, just to
Yeah.
be present because even a little bit of time present, if you're, a working parent and you're very busy, even just that hour of uninterrupted time is way better than the nooks and crannies of the 5 minutes here and there.
What role do trust and transparency play in a relationship, and how can couples rebuild trust if it's been broken?
Yeah, I mean, you have to trust your partner. If you don't trust your partner, everything is going to be about that distrust. It's going to come up in everything. And I think this can be really hard. And I admire couples that work through trust issues and come out the other side because it is hard work. I think that the first thing that you have to decide is if that trust has been lost, do you want to have that back? And you have to be all in. It's not just maybe I'm going to trust them again, because it is a lot of work to repair trust that's been broken. So I think that the big thing is deciding, do I want to repair this relationship? Do I want to repair this
Mm-hmm.
trust? And making that decision. And once you make that decision, be in it. If the decision is I want to repair broken trust, then repair it. Don't make everything about whatever issue happened that made you lose trust in your partner. And I think this also goes back to communication. So if you feel like you're losing trust with your partner about whatever that is, communicating that. Maybe it's I don't I'm feeling a little uneasy when you don't let me see what's on your phone because I'm a little insecure. It that's probably what you're feeling. Um and sometimes we make situations in our mind much bigger than they actually are because we don't ask questions or communicate how we're feeling. Maybe we feel embarrassed about it, but it feels much worse to hold that in than to just put it out there on the table. This is what I'm fearful of, and this is why I'm fearing it
Mm-hmm.
because of maybe these A, B, and C behaviors. And without blame, I mean, if you don't have concrete evidence that something has happened um, to make you not trust your partner, I would definitely not just say that this is what's happening. You can just say, these are the things that sometimes make me feel like this could be happening. And that
Mm-hmm.
makes me feel this way. And so having those conversations early before you let things build up in your mind. I think that's the worst thing that we can do is that when we think that something may or may not be happening, our brain is going to throw all kinds of evidence to us for where we are leaning. So maybe an example is, I think my husband is gambling when he told me he wouldn't, right? Because that comes up in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
If you're thinking to yourself, I think he's gambling again. I think this is happening. Your brain is really, really good at providing you evidence for what you believe. Just similarly, if you thought to yourself, I don't think he's gambling anymore, your brain is going to find evidence that that's not happening. So I think understanding that whatever you're looking at, whatever issue that is, like you're going to actively look for evidence that you are correct. So that's innately what we do. And what's going to happen is you're going to keep building that up and up and up until you believe it's true without ever having that conversation to know, is that really what's happening? So I think when you start to feel that uneasiness, bringing that up, and your partner may or may not be open to exploring that issue, but bringing it up early on. And then if for some reason trust has been broken, maybe there is a major life event, maybe there's infidelity or something your spouse said they wouldn't do and they continue to do it, whatever that is, again, deciding, do I want to repair this or not? Because you have to be in if you're going to try to repair it. And there's going to need to be clear expectations of what is the relationship going to look like from now on. Like, these are the things that I need from you in order to learn to trust you again. And it's kind of starting from square one. I mean, you're kind of starting over, in those early stages where you're developing trust. You're starting over, but with a lot more resistance because there has been a pattern before. But I think that, actions obviously speak louder than words. And so really looking at the actions of both of you. Am I showing that I want to trust my partner again? And are they showing me that, they can earn back my trust?
How can couples support each other when there are external stressors that are putting pressure on the marriage, such as financial issues, or work pressure, or something that maybe is threatening or straining the relationship?
Yeah. So again, I think communicating about it, not just letting it fester, making it a known issue. Hey, this is affecting our relationship. Your job stress is affecting our relationship in these ways. And then I think being a support rather than a hindrance to our partner. So I think sometimes when something external becomes an issue in the relationship, there's a tendency to want to blame the other party of like, well, this is your fault because it's your thing, right? Versus how can I support them with the stress that they're dealing with at work so that I'm an ally for my partner in this situation versus creating more stress. So if it's finances, so again, we talked about this earlier, how can we come out this together to solve it? Let's solve this together versus separately. And saying that, how can we solve this together? How can I help you with what you're dealing with? Because we know it impacts our family. And sometimes we need to be a friend first. And so, listening to our spouse about whatever the struggle is that's going on, and also letting them know how it's affecting you and what can I be doing differently to relieve this stress. And these can be, some of these are not easy things to fix, right? You can't just switch jobs. Finances don't just make themselves better overnight. These are long-term processes of finding out, like, how can we make this work together so that it's not as stressful for both of us? And, being there for each other and not seeing it as a them or a you issue, but an us issue. And I think that's where most couples kind of don't, they're not successful in their communication because it becomes, well, this is your issue instead of this is our issue because it is affecting our marriage. Because in that kind of partnership, it's very rare that it's a you or a them issue. It's normally it's our issue. And so how can we bring that together and come at it together versus alone?
Right. Another conflict in marriage can be intimacy. One partner, often the male, would like to be intimate more often because that is a way that a man connects with his wife, but the wife may not have the same desire or maybe responsive desire. What do you teach people about how to overcome discrepancies in desire for intimacy in relationships?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? Because when it comes to like libido and things like that, um, men and women are vastly different, and when that is peaked, as far as what age that peaks for them. Um, And then you add in having babies and hormones and things like that. And it can become really difficult and really straining on a marriage. And then the added thing of having kids around, right? There's not as much time. And there's just so many factors that kind of go into decreasing intimacy, decreasing in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that again, this comes back to expectations and sometimes having that conversation of like, what's ideal for you?
Mm-hmm.
And well, this is ideal for me. And how can we meet in the middle? And what does that look like? And also, sometimes, I mean, I know this is going to sound silly, but scheduling intimacy, because if not, it just may not happen. You know, when do we know that maybe the kids aren't going to be around, or when do we have alone time? Um, and I know a lot of couples that schedule it in. You know, it's this day at this time, and
Mm-hmm.
if you're not really in a relationship yet, that can sound really silly. But when you know, have been married for a long time, you have kids, it 100% makes sense why you might need to schedule something like that in. Because if not, it won't happen. And sometimes that's a really big part of one or both of the partner's needs to maybe feel loved or close to you. Again, going back to those uh, love languages, and often for men, intimacy, touch, that's their love language. That's what makes them
Mm-hmm.
feel close to their partner. For women, that's not often the main one for us. And so you're taking two different incompatible things and trying to make them compatible. And not to say you have to force it, because you don't want to do that, but you kind of have to talk about it and plan it a little bit. And for some couples, this might be like switching things up a little bit and figuring out, you know, what is their preferred way of intimacy and what does that look like for them. And sometimes it can be even an uncomfortable conversation with your spouse. But if you don't have it, then it's more stressful to kind of be thinking, is that what they're expecting right now? Or what are they expecting from me? Or they're frustrated, etc. And sometimes it's just bring the elephant into the room and call it out. Because if not, it's going to create a lot of stress and tension in your relationship. And, you know, revisiting that from time to time.
In chemistry, we call that they're immiscible. They can't be combined together like it's oil and water don't mix. We know that, but you actually can get those two things to combine with the right chemistry. You can use a solubilizer or something like that that connects. And so it is just finding what's going to help you mix and get more to the middle ground between the two partners and the differences in the desires.
Right.
We kind of touched on earlier that that one partner shouldn't have to like give up all of their desires or their passions and the things they're most interested in just because the other person is not interested in the relationship. So how important is it for each partner to continue growing individually, and how can this personal growth positively impact a relationship?
I think I've seen it actually both ways, where it positively impacts the relationship, and it also can negatively as well.
Mm,
When
sure.
one partner is going through bouts of personal growth and the other partner isn't. Because the way you do things, the way you think, it changes when you've gone through a period of personal growth. And so I think that if you want it to be successful, it's important to share that with your partner. Maybe share what you're learning, maybe share how it's changing you. I think it's really great when you can have a friendship within the relationship,
Hmm.
when you know that it's not just my husband, but it's my friend as well. And so you want to confide in them about these things and about things that are going well and not well for you. And these are things that you can establish early on in the relationship, and talk about your day, talk about things that frustrate you, talk about what you're learning about yourself, etc. If you're going to therapy, share that with your partner. Hey, here's something I learned from my therapist today. Here's something I learned about myself. Do you notice that? You know, I mean, those can be really great conversations to have. But I think that you really need to include your partner in your growth a little bit. or it
Mm-hmm.
can feel like you're on this journey without them. And that might make them feel slighted in some way, like, oh, they're they're going to become a different version and not want me anymore, right? There's a lot of insecurities that can come up with that. And I also think that it's a beautiful thing when couples can grow together. Like, if you're
Mm-hmm.
doing some sort of self-growth and your partner's willing to do it with you, like, what an amazing way to learn different things about each other. But also, I've seen couples outgrow each other because, again, one was doing self-growth and work and the other one wasn't, or wasn't willing to, and they grew apart, and that happens too, unfortunately. But it doesn't have to if you include your partner with it, if they're willing to kind of do some of that growth with you. And that might mean going to therapy together, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can't, if you can only do it alone, maybe you have to learn how to do it together. But I think that self growth and working on yourself is always a great and important thing, especially establishing more awareness around yourself and your patterns. But it's really great to bring that into conversation with your partner. They can learn more about you, you can learn more about them, and you guys can grow together more as well.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned therapy because that's kind of what I want to end the conversation with is when do you think couples should consider seeking help from a therapist, and what can they expect from therapy sessions aimed at strengthening their relationship?
Yeah, so I think that um, there's many reasons why a couple might go for therapy. And it might not always be that something detrimental or horrible has happened in the relationship that they're trying to repair. It might just be that, maybe they feel themselves kind of moving apart from one another, or they're struggling to communicate and they want to be able to do that more. Um, or they just want to grow together in the relationship. Maybe they've experienced something traumatic together and they want to process it with a therapist. So I think that there's those kind of reasons why one might, do couples therapy. I think it's also if issues of infidelity have come up and you're working through trust issues. I think it can be helpful to have a non-judgmental, objective person in the room. I
Mm-hmm.
think if you and your partner are, can't get through a conversation without becoming heated and angry and just resentful of one another, that might be a time where therapy should be brought in. If you're noticing those communication difficulties, if there's been a big change in the relationship or big stressor that you don't feel like you're dealing with well. And I think you can see a lot of signs of that, like, when you're living together, but you're never talking to each other or making eye contact, or it doesn't even, you feel like you're living with a roommate and not a spouse, those kinds of things. You start to kind of feel like there's something off. And I think when you feel like something's off, that might be a good indication that it's time to go to therapy. I think the hard part is a lot of people don't go until they're at that point where it's either divorce or therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this happens to a lot of people in their personal lives too, where they don't go to therapy until they have hit rock bottom. And I would love for us to normalize therapy more and helping
Right.
ourselves more and being proactive more, not even just with our mental health, but with our health, in that what being aware of what is going on now, and do I see it going in a negative direction, and can we work on it now versus when it gets too late. So really, you know, you can go to therapy for anything, anything.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it might be hard to get buy-in from your spouse. And I think that's where I see a lot of couples where they didn't go to therapy until they were ready to get divorced because their spouse wasn't willing to go until that point, until that was threatened. And that's hard. Obviously, you can't make someone go. Um, you can let them know it's really important to you and it would mean a lot to you, and those things, but you can't make them go. And so if a couple decides to go to therapy, what they can expect is they're going to have someone else in the room that is their job is not to take sides. We're always trained,
Mm-hmm.
don't take sides. If you find yourself taking a side, they may need a different therapist, because
Yeah.
at that point you're not objective anymore. If you're siding with one person, you're not objective. And you need to be that neutral person that can say, I notice that this is happening when you talk about that. Can we dive a little bit deeper into that? And how does that feel for you? So it's really going to be somebody that's almost kind of moderating things between the two of you. So helping you understand and recognize some of the patterns that you have in your communication, in your emotions, things like that, helping you learn some coping skills together as a couple so that things don't get out of hand, so your emotions don't get to the point where you can't bring them down. Um, Helping develop different, routines and healthy practices like a date night, or, 10 minutes that you set aside, you set a timer and you talk during those 10 minutes. Just different things and exercises that you may not have tried before, that can help you grow closer as a couple, help you work through conflict better, etc. And, you know, I think some of the difficulty is that you have two people in the room and they both have to feel connected to the therapist. And so you may find, go to the first therapist and you think, oh my gosh, they were amazing. And your spouse thinks, I am not comfortable with them. And you might have to try out a few therapists, because you do
Right.
have to find one that both of you are comfortable with, or it's just not going to work.
Hmm.
And it's okay to interview your therapist because you need to feel comfortable with them.
Yeah, I think that's such an important statement that you made, that we need to find the right therapist, because if you are with the wrong therapist, therapy is not going to be effective. It's not going to be helpful. You need to get to the right person that you both can connect with, and feel like you can have improvement in your relationship through working with that individual. Well, Kayla, I thank you for taking some time to share all of these important strategies. And I hope the listeners have found at least one thing that they can start implementing and adjusting in their relationships now to make them more healthy. Because, like I said, that is directly correlated with your ability to reduce the amount of disease and mortality that you have. So your health and longevity will be improved if you can improve your relationships. So I hope people will take these tips and things that have been shared to heart. And thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for investing your precious time with us today. I trust you've uncovered valuable insights to elevate your health and enhance your quality of life. If you're hungry for more evidence-based wisdom to transform your well-being, I invite you to check out my 20-plus books, all waiting to be explored on my website, authorscott.com. Don't miss out on the chance to supercharge your knowledge. Please share, like, and subscribe to be part of the movement revolutionizing lives. In a world drowning in noise and endless information, your share can be the beacon that guides others to a better life. Together, let's make a difference by amplifying the life-changing knowledge you've gained today. Until next time, here's to your journey to boundless health and unbridled happiness.